All right, do we want to go ahead and get into it?
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about the journey, traveling in Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games. This is a topic that has probably been on the master list of topics for the podcast since the inception of the podcast, whenever I was very first coming up with the brainstorm of the different topics we were going to talk about, and it's just never seemed like the right time to go about it. But I was re-going over the list, and this is definitely something that I feel like in my Thursday game has been a big part of just the game itself over the past, let's see, we started it in April, so we're very close to 9-10 months now that we've been playing that game. And Eliot, you've got in your it's no longer Curse of Strahd, it's now Lords of Barovia, where we are going to the four corners of the map, and this may be something that comes up as our characters are going out into the larger world.
Yeah, no spoilers for the players in the game here, but yeah, this will probably be the first time this is the first time I've thought so hard about what my players are going to do for travel, because in Barovia, when you're stuck inside Barovia, it's pretty point and click, and just me as a DM, I'm not a huge fan of the random encounter. I don't like road encounters because I feel like if you set the precedence that it's going to be like a random encounter every time you're rolling, then I don't know. I just don't like the whole bog down of in-game travel. But now that everybody's going to unknown lands for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm rethinking travel and how I'm going to approach it and making it actually a fun part of the game itself. So I had a question. The first thing I thought about, I had a question that I was going to throw at you guys before we jump into D&D specific. Is there any system that you guys know of that does anything significantly different than Dungeons and Dragons and how it manages time and travel and distance? Or is travel like an area in RPGs that are kind of all the same? I can't think of any system that does travel good. Am I wrong?
In my experience, travel is one of those things that's very often ignored as far as there being game support for. In fantasy games and other types of games, you've got random encounter tables, and that's pretty much it. You're given like the pace at which players can get from point A to point B, and in some systems you're given random encounter tables, and that's about it as far as support for travel.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience too. So what is good travel? Is there bad travel?
Oh God, yes, there is bad travel. There is bad travel when it is painful to go through. When out of character, it is as boring as traveling is in character.
Amen.
I've had GMs in the past who absolutely love description. They love to describe things, and going from point A to point B is 30 minutes or more of the DM just describing every single step of the way. It's almost as bad as reading Tolkien whenever the ring is very slowly making its way from Rivendell to Mordor.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm going to relive. I'm going to illustrate for those people who haven't been through it. Who hasn't had this moment? You're part. Okay, it's night time. What are you guys going to do? Oh, we're going to definitely camp. Okay, where are you going to camp? Describe 10 minutes of the party arguing where they're going to camp on the road. Okay, who's taking watch? 10 minutes of who's arguing over who's taking what watch. Okay. Nothing happens. What happened? It's the next day. What's going on? Like 30 minutes of just minutia bullshit. That's why I hate travel. That's why I hate that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, as a DM, I can see why people do it, because you're kind of guaranteeing that you've got content ready and we're playing the game at full throttle the whole time. How many times did we leave a part of Barovia, like say leave Kresk and then get to Vallaki? You know, it's a full day's journey. I'd imagine most DMs would actually run stuff in between, and I mean, you're supposed to. It's Barovia's supposed to be very deadly, but I rolled it out. There were fewer random encounters than there were random encounters along the road, even by their system, and you know, it just seems like such a waste. Even those random encounters. Like, how do you guys feel about the road random encounter?
Man, it depends on what the game is. If it's a pretty typical Dungeons and Dragons game, then it's sort of built in that you're going to run across, 3d6 goblins or whatever the fucking thing is. That's just part of the game that you signed up for. But if it's like a really heavily story-driven kind of thing, like, if I'm reading some epic fantasy shit, unless it's Tolkien, it's almost never, here's this thing that happened in this mile stretch of road, and here's this thing that happened in the next mile stretch of road. It's like, they departed from city A and arrived at city B, blah, blah, blah. It's nobody gives a shit. Like, you can hop continents in fantasy stories, and yeah, you went to a port town, you got on a boat, you went to the next port town, you got a horse, rode out, blah, blah, blah. Tolkien, though, is a lot of, like, people hiking and having picnics.
Oh, I know.
And seeing the ruins.
Yep. All the ruins.
All the ruins. There's a reason why I bogged down at the beginning of Two Towers. I'm taking a break. I was just happy I managed to get through Fellowship for the first time. But that's exactly what... I needed a break from all these fucking descriptions. All these flowers. It's like, okay, I get it, dude. But, go ahead, Clayton.
I was just going to say, like, to your point earlier of, like, the minutia of travel, the player characters, what are they doing in the evenings? What's the order of the watch? What's the marching order? All of those types of things I try to take care of at the very beginning of the campaign, establish a standard operating procedure for the party, and just get all of that out of the way. We discuss it once, and I make it clear that if there's ever any change to this, let me know. But otherwise, we are going to assume that this is how it is every single time, just because I, as the game master, do not want to have to go through this shit every single time, because it is tedious. It is boring. Nobody gives a shit.
Yes, and that's a good idea, Clayton.
And whenever you, as the DM, decide, okay, now whether the dice decide or whether the DM decides, okay, now we're having an encounter here, there is no argument from the players about how they would have been set up for this thing, because you had already established it, and there isn't this, oh, well, I would have had my bow ready. No, that's not part of your standard operating procedure. So, your bow is not ready. We can get on with this encounter.
Oh, that is a good idea. I'm bad about ignoring those kinds of details. That had never even, like, crossed my mind. Usually,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, whenever I start out the campaign, something that I've done the past couple of campaigns I've run has been in Roll20, and during the first session of actual play, while the player characters are getting their tokens onto the map and everything, I will section off the current map that everybody is on, and I will create several templates. One of them is a 5-foot wide corridor. One of them is a 10-foot wide corridor. Another one is a much wider corridor. And then there is one representing open wilderness. And I say, okay, each one of you put a token in here and establish your marching order now. And this is what we will go back to anytime in the future when something interesting happens, and you're in one of these situations.
That swooched, stole that right there. That's a really good one. Is there a time and a place for travel though? I was just thinking, I feel like early on, like low levels, 1 through 5 maybe ish, I think travel, in a weird way, I feel like it's almost essential, because in my mind, it would take a hell of a random encounter to really put some pressure on a high level character in the first place. So at that point, why run it? But like when you're, second level and a couple D6 worth of goblins come at you out of the woods, that's a fight. I feel like it always reminds me of I think it's what's the first Dragonlance book? Autumn Twilight. I feel like there was a lot of really good travel talk. Now they were a little higher level than that, I guess, but I don't know. I felt like reading that book, I felt like that was a good depiction of what travel is, because the first book, they're all together, they're fairly low level, and like things happen on the road, and you develop they use it as a chance to develop their characters and explore their relationships. What do you guys think about that? Low level characters maybe needing travel more than high level characters.
I definitely think it's an important. If the world is a dangerous place, then actually going through and doing random encounters and things, or planned encounters at low levels, is very, very important. And like you just said on establishing the characters, I think that having at least one point in time during each journey where the player characters are sitting down at the fire at the end of a long day's journey, or sitting in their hotel rooms if they've if it's a modern or futuristic game, having a period of time in which the player characters can have an in-character conversation, I think is very vital for creating characters that the players are interested in and conveying information about the other characters. Because when in the hell else are you going to talk about your character's backstory?
Clayton, straight up, I don't think anybody gives a fuck. Like, it sounds good and all, and maybe this is some like higher level role playing style to aspire to or some such thing. But every time I've seen that even start to come up, nobody gives a damn. It's just somebody grabbing some spotlight to talk about some shit about their backstory that's not relevant to anyone else. Like, the only time that I ever see characters really interact with each other and portray anything about who they are to each other is when they're discussing how to solve some problem that they all share. You know what I mean?
I feel that. And I do agree that it's hard to pull off a non-essential, I guess the acting side of RPGs. I definitely think that there's a little place for that. I've seen it myself, just when you have a good character. It doesn't even have to be, like, I can understand them. Nobody likes the monologuer. Like, let me tell you about my character's unique background. But when I love it whenever when the pressure's off, maybe even the game's kind of winding down, or it's not. Maybe you're just in a natural stopping point and players decide to interact with each other in character. And it forwards the plot, of course, maybe not trying to overtly, I don't know. I've had a lot of I really enjoy it whenever players' characters are interesting enough to where the players feel like their characters have things to say or do that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the greater story or solving a problem. When done well, I think it's a lot of fun. But when done badly, it's just a wasted time.
I don't remember one single time that I've heard a character's backstory be told to me and enjoyed the experience.
Well,
maybe I'm just an asshole. That's totally possible.
Well, I would include in that, like, the discussion of backstory also, like the backstory of whatever current mission the player characters are on. Because I have been in games with you where we've had in-character conversations where we're on the road on a particular mission, and we are just now learning the full details of the mission because one of the player characters, or a small group of the player characters, had like a small adventure in town in which they got this lead to this next adventure. And then using this downtime as a way of communicating that information in character can be fun, and it can show bits of your character's personality, because each different player and their characters will know the information or will have perceived the information in a slightly different manner.
And, but that doesn't necessarily have to be done around the campfire. That's as far as it relating to travel. I think that travel is often one of those places for like problems to be worked out on the way to, say you're going to the dungeon. It's just natural that you would figure out what you're going to do while you're walking to that dungeon. But, stopping points and like decompression points and like puzzle figuring out, you know what I mean? Putting plots together, they can happen anywhere too. I don't think that you don't lose the ability to have that decompression time with your party members if you don't do a whole lot of travel. It's just, I just think that just like in anything, it really just goes back to me and my bias as a DM. I feel like I don't like things that aren't purposeful, that don't, even if it's a purpose that the characters don't value. Say it's a plot that the DM's developing that the players have no intention of for pursuing. But just having something in there to have it there, I don't know. I've always hated that. I don't like meaningless encounters. I don't think that, but at the same time, just getting jumped every time getting jumped every time you go on a travel session, is also to me unrealistic. It's like I always hated those DMs whenever I'm like, okay, we're leaving this city. Everybody get ready. Sharpen your swords. We're definitely, right. I just watched him roll it. We got, what's it going to be this time? Trolls? Oh, great. Wolves. Ew. Dire wolves. Oh.
Yeah, like, how the fuck do farmers bring their goods to market in this world?
Right. It's like, this is a hell of a place. But at the same time, man, Clayton, we were all DMs here, so you guys know. Jordan, you tend to prefer to run in high lethal systems. I think high lethal systems deal with travel better because you never graduate out of it's really lethal, you could run into a hobo with a knife in Apocalyptia and, a couple bad rolls and somebody's dead, no matter what level they're at, So you can kind of harass them with, combats, during travel, and it's never less deadly, right?
Yeah, and survival games like that are, at least in my experience, they either orbit around one central location almost the whole time, be it, a cabin in the woods where you're making your stand against the zombies, or, the last little trader outpost in the world that anyone knows about, whatever. It's either that or it's like an exploration, like hex crawl, run for your life every session kind of scenario. At least these are the ones that I've run, and when I've seen other people run them, it often looks like that as well. You rarely get the same kind of story structure as fantasy games, because those and sci-fi games, because those are predicated on some kind of civilization where you're bouncing between these cities and towns and key locations and stuff, when everything is just kind of like a demolished wasteland, and the only thing that there is to find out there is rubble and occasional little groups of crazy people or whatever. You can't really do like a travel vignette, and you don't know where you're going. You don't have a destination. You're just trying to stay alive. Like tomorrow is the destination. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And the game I ran before this one was A World of Darkness. It's a post-apocalyptic style game, and it was a much different thing. If you didn't, they expected to be harassed. The whole point of the genre really is to be on the edge of your seat and feel unsafe almost at all times. And so, like, it's appropriate at that point. It's expected in those types of a genre to have to be ready for something on the road, and anytime you travel from one place to another. That's where most of the game is.
It really annoys me whenever you're doing like either random or planned encounters, and every single encounter that you come across is 1dx of something trying to kill you. Random encounters should not be predictable, and that includes whether or not you are encountering something that is hostile to you or not. I think that random encounters should be bigger than just you see enemies. You should also see people you can interact with. You should also come across, like in Lord of the Rings, like particular locations or things that are interesting. The purpose of the random encounter is to throw some chaos into the game, but it's not really throwing in chaos if every time you hear the DM roll dice, you know, okay, got to pull out my sword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eliot.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I feel like I'm in danger of making the same point over and over again because it's really, I mean, it's very much my main, especially in D&D. It's just that whenever I think parties should be, harassed, right? It's just that, in combat and being jumped on the road or travel time is a perfectly good, place for players to be, assailed. But it just makes sense but in a D&D game, me personally with my taste, it's like, why am I randomly fighting 5 bugbears when, the big bad who I've been, messing with for 5 or 6 levels now, catches wind that we're journeying out from, from one place to the next. It's, that's right for ambushes. And it's just, everything should be tied back to something. It should make sense. Like if at the end of an encounter, people should like kind of like last session, you guys fought that, the elves and the druids. That was essentially a random encounter, but it was a planned random encounter. You know what I mean? And at the end of it, you guys are kind of scratching your head like, what the heck does all this mean? It's driving the plot forward, So
yeah, we learned something that we didn't know before, and that should be every encounter. There shouldn't be just an encounter that exists so that the player characters, because the dice determined that the player characters are going to have a fight here. Even whenever I create random encounter tables, like I did in my Thursday game, my Scarred Marches game, whenever I created those random encounter tables, I made the list, and it wasn't just there are 2d6 treants here whenever they encounter this thing. I also put in that I put in some detail about the treants to make it interesting. For instance, the treants were being drawn to the south. So wherever they encountered them, they were making a beeline to the south, and they were just stomping anything that was in its path or in their path. And that ended up being I'm sorry, I'm confusing 2 random encounters. They encountered a different creature that was just moving to the south. At the time, I didn't know why that particular character was going south, but I was able to pull upon other things that were happening in the game, and I could not predict when that encounter was going to happen. But whenever the encounter did happen, there was something going on in the south, and so I was able to weave that back into the story and have it play a role in the overarching story and give the players some new information about what is going on.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. I guess maybe there's many times, most of the time, I'm struggling to figure out what should, you guys because that's part of the game too. A variety of monsters. There's a reason why the monster manual has so many damn creatures in it, because we're at the end of the day, we're playing a sword and hack and slash sword and sorcery kind of game, and who wants to fight the same things or humans over and over and over again? So that's something that I do try to go in. Like a random encounter table is not necessarily bad. It's just that the stereotype or the cliche of like, okay, they're on the road, so I'm going to roll some dice in the moment. That's just never a good way to do it, in my opinion. I think that random encounter tables could and should be used to get you out of your comfort zone. But then once you've rolled them up, just figure out, then you make sure that the DM just really owes it to the players to go out of their way to make it meaningful in some way, even if they just totally generated it at random.
To pull another example from my Scarred Marches game, I had on my random encounter table, I had these obelisks that it was completely random when they would show up. My random encounter table included it had 4 categories: sapient creatures, monuments, locations, and wild creatures. And this obelisk, I kept rolling for it. And the player characters started noticing this pattern, well, what appeared to them to be a pattern of these obelisks being on the map. Where the obelisk was completely random, but as there were more of them coming on, they seemed to be forming a line. And so the player characters put 2 and 2 together and came up on their own. I think that these ancient obelisks, I think they're the markers of this ancient civilization that I had been alluding to at several points previously in the campaign. And you know what? Up until they had said that was not what was going on. But you can bet your ass that was what was happening from that point on in the game.
Those are the moments I'm starting to come back around and reappreciate now that I'm off script and back to just generating content, completely from scratch. Is enjoying a blank page is something I've had to get reused to. For so long, I had hundreds and thousands and millions of words, I guess, in the Strahd book that covered every NPC, every person. I knew you could look up every single thing, but that kills a lot of that fun. That fun part about being a DM, the improvising and letting the players generate a lot of the content, and trying to walk that line between being prepared and then being, but still allowing the players, to feel as if they're onto it. You know what I mean? Which a lot of times, in a module, it's a dead end. If they go to the wrong place, they go to the wrong place. The maps, you know what I mean? I really enjoy that part of the game these days. I'm getting to get more comfortable with it.
Define going to the wrong place.
Oh, well, I feel like if you have a module and, for instance, you guys recently went to the werewolf den. I guess there's no reason why, if you guys, went left when you should go right, and you just, I don't know, somebody was like, I think it's this direction, and, that's just not where it is. I guess I could still just be like, oh, yes, that's exactly where it is. But I feel like in modules that are so laid out and detailed, you can pinpoint it on a map. You have, I guess at that point, that's whenever you let the players go to a dead end and make that part of the game, be more. But am I making any sense at all?
You are making sense.
I feel like.
But
go ahead.
I was just going to add that getting lost was a major hurdle back in the day before, before like Rome's roads were a thing. And even after, like getting lost out in the woods, was a big fucking deal. People died of exposure, and that's why people stuck to the roads. If you're an adventuring group and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you do go the wrong way, and the DM decides not to suddenly move the location to wherever you guys are actually heading, that is an adventure in and of itself. Or maybe not an entire adventure. It is definitely an encounter in and of itself, where the player characters realize that they are lost. They're not getting to where they need to go. And you have a lot of role-playing opportunity there, figuring out how in the hell are we going to get back on track? How are we going to find ourselves now that we are lost?
I've always wanted to make a game where travel is the whole centerpiece, that the characters exist in a world where they have no clue very far beyond their borders. And so the whole game is set up to be exploration. And the way the game works is more or less the players getting sidetracked, and that being a common feature in the game, that, there's a real consequences if they don't interact with the environment very well. And have you guys ever played a game like that was actually fun and not just a bunch of tedious survival roles, essentially?
You just described my Thursday game. That's one of the main reasons why I was wanting to talk about this topic, is just so far that game has been a resounding success for me. The way I initially created the locations where the player characters are initially set, I put them basically in the middle of the map in a keep. There was a single road that led off to the right, to the right end of the map and off of the map. Everything else was unexplored. I had some initial story hooks inside of the keep that was the center of the map, and I placed on the map, just out around it, the locations where those particular story hooks where they led to. Everything else was blank. I randomly rolled for the terrain. I randomly rolled for whether or not there were random encounters, and the random encounters included terrain features on them. So as the player characters explore, they encounter all of these things just completely randomly. And sometimes I threw in an adventure that was completely random when they were going to encounter it. Like, for instance, I had an encounter where they encountered a bunch of elves, and the elves were protecting the border of their land, which was right up against the central kingdom, or the central lord's land, and was actually in contention with the local lord, because the local lord had moved in relatively recently. And so at the beginning of the campaign, I had no idea where the elven enclave was and where their territory started and stopped. That was something that came up in game and became a major plot point in the game. So the entire game was randomly generated, but I think that the thing that made it work the best was I was not 100% consistent with being dogmatic about randomly rolling on those tables. There were some times when I just wasn't feeling it, and I didn't want to have a random account. I didn't want to have a 15% chance every hour that there was going to be a random encounter. So I either fudged the rolls, I ignored the rolls, or I waited and changed it so that they were only rolling once every 2 hours, or once every half day, or something like that, just to change it up so that there wasn't just this endless slog of just random encounter after random encounter as they made their way from point A to their vague idea of where point B was. And to go to your point about the rations and all of that, I had originally intended that getting lost and running out of rations was going to be a big deal in this game. Unfortunately, I'm running the game in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and even at first level, a character can take, I want to say it's the Outlander background, and you automatically gain enough food every single day to feed some number of player character or some number of people, and that completely threw out any chance of the player characters running out of food. So I just dealt with it. I just ignored that part because it wasn't going to be a part of the game, because the players selected that ability and I wasn't going to take that ability away from them.
Yeah, that's so D&D.
Most of my Apocalyptia games have worked like that, Eliot. That keeping track of your units of food, keeping track of your units of water, all that kind of shit. Having to find medicine when you're hurt so that you heal properly, that kind of stuff. That's a part of almost all of those games, and I can never tell who is having what.
Is it tedious?
Yeah, who's having fun and who's not. I can tell that, some players really like it. I think that some players probably really fucking don't.
Yeah. And, that's just, you're going to have that. I mean, but I would see that would be fun to me. That's why I imagine the game is set in, when I've been thinking about the game, it's, in my mind right now, it's set in your system for that reason. Because I want it to be, and I guess that's the thing though. I mean, I think you said this earlier though, Clayton, getting lost should be a big part of the game, but in my mind, there should really be no getting quote unquote lost, because it should still lead to some sort of interesting thing. It's like getting lost is just another way of finding an ancient pyramid. You know what I mean? That's in the ancient jungle. Like getting lost is one way. Like some DMs can play like, oh, you're getting lost on the road as like getting, I don't know, what's the word, kind of like clowning on players a little bit, like, oh, you're still lost, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. But in my mind, it would be fun to have a game where there were like lost contingencies, where if the players are on the road and they happen to get sidetracked, or somebody misses a roll and they go left when they should have gone right, they don't find maybe they don't find the landmark that they were looking for, but as a DM, I've prepared like, oh, cool, this is when they're gonna find the lost temple. You know what I mean? That has that's a really cool encounter in and of itself. You know what I mean? That's because that's how I imagine it would have been back in the ancient history, right? It's like when you know nothing, you have everything to discover, right? And at some point, someone's been almost everywhere. So when people get lost, it should still lead to interesting things that could happen to them.
Yeah, like the crazy stories that travelers would tell, like at the dawn of kind of the age of exploration, in the 1500s, were ridiculous. Like people would talk about like just inhuman types of creatures that they swore had cities and whole civilizations in far-flung parts of Asia or wherever. The place where people walk on their hands, or the place where people have blue skin. Just complete nonsense. But lots of people bought it because no one had ever been more than fucking 50 miles from their home or something.
Right. And how many cities were there that were paved with gold? Back in those stories of a million cities like that. But then again, on the other hand, imagine being. I always think about Otzi the Iceman. Are you guys familiar with Otzi? For those of you who aren't, he's a 9 or 10,000 year old mummy, I think. Maybe that's about right. That was frozen in the Alps, and he was very well preserved, and so he's like, now we have an actual like almost living example of what it looked like to be a prehistoric man. But anywho, imagine a guy like that was just traveling across the Alps, and put them a little further in time, and they walked to Egypt. Or there's no reason why someone who lived a nomadic life didn't have the ability to travel great distances. And I mean, just imagine the awe, or even if it was a ruined pyramid, even imagine being a complete foreign outsider, someone from India that chose to walk towards Egypt, and then they just stumble upon the pyramids inexplicably. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of sense of wonder I think travel could and really should give to players. But it just depends too, I mean, like on your game.
And you're talking about just seeing something that is interesting, something that's out of the ordinary for you. And that doesn't have to necessarily be something that has been created by man or other sapient species. It could just be going into a different environment, and like your example of the guy from India traveling to Egypt and seeing a hippopotamus.
Yeah, true. How often does that happen in most RPGs, where you're just struck by the wonder of the unknown? Because I never really thought. Because I mean, as a DM, I know I don't even really like. I don't. I try to, but I very rarely. And I remember being a young player. How many of you guys were like this when you were in your earliest days of playing games? Just sitting down at a D&D table just transported you to the magical places. And anytime you ran across a bugbear, it was a big deal. Like, I remember being like so delighted to run across monstrous creatures. Now, anymore, it's just like, okay, I'm tired of goblins. That's good. You know what I mean? Random encounters could be just a really good excuse to wander around the pages of the monster manual and throw. I mean, it could just be as simple as that. It's like, oh, we haven't fought a dragon yet. Okay, let's go. I just wanted to fight a dragon. So there you go. Just throw a dragon in. I mean, it could be as simple as that.
I was listening to the last episode, and this came up about trolls, Clayton. You were talking about like just knowing how to kill a troll, you know? It's stuff like that I'd like to see completely original monsters or completely different takes on monsters, because after doing it this long, it's fucking boring seeing most monsters now. Like, you can already just kind of like work it out in your head. Even if you don't know the exact stats, you know, you got a pretty good idea how this ogre fight is gonna go because you fought 60 fucking ogres in your role-playing career.
Well, that's why I chose to reskin the Lucaviri. That the fly people that you guys are encountering now, those aren't in the monster manual. Maybe they are. I don't realize it, but I just wanted there to be a fly person. You know, I just wanted there to be. I mean, most games, most cool settings that I really like, they always have at least their own take on a creature or their own creature. I remember what were the dragon people in Dragonlance called again?
Draconians.
Yeah, the Draconians. Whenever they first encountered them, and like, you know, I just remember them. They stabbed one, and then they're like, what was it? The sword got stuck in it because it turned to stone or something like that.
Yeah, depending on their color, every one of them died in a different way.
I just was always struck by how confused the players were, because they were like us. They lived the world. They'd fought everything, and then here they are. They're adventurers, and now they have new creatures to run into, and they're having to discover out. I just thought those were really cool aspects. But I mean, you know, it's not that hard to just reskin. You know, I think a lot of people are hesitant. Maybe not, but you know, if you want them to fight a troll and be, you know, either be surprised by the troll, what's wrong with just changing the troll too? Like, haha, fuckers, this is a magic troll that no longer is. It's got to be affected by cold, you know, or something like that. There's some potential in that too to throw players. Does that piss you guys off when that kind of stuff happens, that DMs take classics and then just change some of their key features? Do you think that is a good thing to do, a bad thing to do?
That's what I was just saying. That's what I'd like to see, because I already know what everything is. What I would want, though, is for the DM to say up front that it's not going to be your standard classical monsters in D&D. Shit's going to work totally differently, and you don't know how they work because they're, you know, maybe you do roll for, you know, your folklore or whatever, but I would be irritated if I went at it in the normal prescribed way just to find out at the last minute, oh, sorry, actually fire doesn't do anything to trolls. You know what I mean?
I don't know that I agree with that. I don't think the DM owes the players an explanation for curveballs. I think that go ahead, Clayton.
If it's a creature that the player characters have encountered before, and this one is completely inexplicably, like using the troll example, the player characters have fought some trolls, and then the next troll that they fight is inexplicably vulnerable to cold instead of fire, and there's nothing else different about the troll. There's no description different about the troll. I would be pissed off because I want my character to realize something is different, rather than the DM just telling me, "Oh, it's not. This was different." I want to be told through description that maybe the tinge of this troll, maybe its skin is tinged blue rather than green, or some sort of indication that would let me know that this thing is not like all the others.
Agreed. That's more where I'm kind of. That's more where my mind would be, especially if it's something they've run into before. But like, you know, if I wanted to throw you guys off, because once again, you know, if you're playing with experienced players, I think that's kind of something you almost owe them. Find ways to re-engage them, and you know, knowing that they know is a pretty powerful idea, and I could see that being annoying for the player, but at the same time, I don't know how you can really. I don't know. To me, I think a DM when the DM sits down in a chair, I think everybody should just be aware and that, a DM has the fiat to change whatever they want to do. And just because you think and because we're playing quote unquote in D&D, I don't think there's anything. I think that everybody should expect their DM to have the right to change things on the go. Like you said, Clayton, if you just do it willy nilly and there's no way for people to know, but I mean, even then, if it was the first time they ran into a troll, how would they know a difference?
Yeah, I think you're thinking of it from a DM perspective primarily. I would say that you should be aware of the currency that you're spending when you do stuff like that, because whether it's seasoned adventurers that have fought particular monsters before, or just people that have grown up in this world and they've heard the fairy tales since they were children of how monsters work and stuff like that, when you directly undermine that, especially in like a tactically compromising situation that could really fuck up your character, there's a betrayal that happens there and a devaluing of character knowledge and player experience at the same time, that I think it's just not going to sit well with a lot of people. And unless there's a good explanation for it, it's going to seem arbitrary and petty, and that's going to devalue the entire experience. That's why I'm saying ahead of time there should be like some understanding, like, hey, I'm not running this straight out of the book. This is its own world with its own kind of monsters. Some look kind of similar, some kind of don't. It's a wild and fantastical place, and you're just gonna have to figure it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I chose to make the fly people just completely from scratch. Even though I prefer my preference is to let the book creatures be the book creatures, and then if you want to throw something curveball-y at the party, just make it up and reskin it and call it something different and go for there. That way at that point they have no reason to be. Then you have no reason to be kind of pissed off. You know what I mean? And I don't know what this has to do with travel, but we seem to have gotten here. These are all things I guess you fight on the road.
Right. I want to ask you guys one thing real quick about like going back to like setting up camp and like the logistics of that kind of shit. How often do you guys fuck characters over by enforcing sleeping in armor rules? Or, for that matter, the reality of not having your bow strung all the time?
Not nearly as much as we ought to.
Wait, that's a rule?
So, is it more fun to put stuff like that in there than it is to just say the knight is sleeping in his armor and no one gives a shit?
I don't know. It definitely needs to be a consistent thing. Or I think that as the DM, you should definitely lay that out there. It's like, guys, by the way, from this point forward, I'm going to be enforcing this rule. But then you're just kind of tipping. Then you're just kind of letting it be known. It's like, I'm going to start screwing with you guys now. Like, you know what I mean?
Like, you can't leave your saddles on your horses 24 hours a day. There's a bunch of little things like that.
I didn't know that was a rule. So
no, I mean in real life.
Armor thing. I know that, but in the armor thing.
Yeah,
is that actually a rule?
You can sleep in light armor.
You just can't sleep in heavy.
I think it doesn't count as a long rest if you're sleeping in medium or heavy armor. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I don't mind that stuff if it's spelled out ahead of time, and because
it would be something I would if I had. I think that's something that you do need to do from the beginning. It would suck if I did it in my game, right?
If you started doing it now without any warning, yes, it would absolutely suck. I'm with Jordan that like as long as the DM makes it apparent at the very beginning of the game that this is kind of the tone and the vibe and the just the feel of the game, that you're not going to be sleeping in armor. That's fair warning. You can, like, the player characters know, and they can make their preparations accordingly with that knowledge. I would not have a problem playing in a game that I was told that up front. I would have problems if I was if we had had encounters before and suddenly I was told, well, your paladin character, they really wouldn't be sleeping in full plate after you've had encounters in the middle of the night before. In this encounter, you don't have any armor. What do you mean in this encounter?
Right. I mean, I could see. There could be ways to change it at this point in my game, say, or any game that you could. I think you could do it. It's just why. But yeah, I don't know though. I mean, to a certain point, once again, it boils down to the system too, and the type of game you're trying to run, like you said, Clayton, because that stuff gets so grindy so fast. It's like if whenever you're, I mean, you can literally spend entire game sessions just like checking off your freaking checklist. You know what I mean? It's like it takes 20 minutes to saddle the horses. Okay, who's cooking the day's meal? Oh, everybody, we're out of rations. Who's hunting? You're going to go do that. Like, you could, I mean, it's like, at this point, it's like, why am I not just like watching, a computer program run itself? Why am I not just standing still in Skyrim and watching the world just walk around me? You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the equivalent of in a dungeon making a find traps roll every 5 feet.
I've never understood that one.
It's just not
either.
Fun.
I've never understood that one. Find traps is just kind of confusing. That could be a whole session for me. Traps in general, pulling those traps in dungeons off. Those how to do dungeon crawls would be a good episode too. I think
it's on the list.
We could talk for days on that one too.
What is the interlude mechanic in Savage Worlds, Clayton?
So the interlude mechanic in Savage Worlds is you decide that something like in this particular instance, it's for travel. Whenever you break up the travel into certain amount of segments, it's arbitrary. It's up to the DM. So for instance, we're traveling from point A to point B. It's going to cost, it's going to be broken up into 4 segments, just as a random number. And each time, in each one of those segments, which may represent a day, it may represent a week, but the DM, draws a card from the action deck, and whatever suit that card is determines what type of travel adversity the player characters encounter during that thing. It's kind of the Savage Worlds version of a random encounter table, but it is much more vague. Give me just a second, so let me pull it up out of the book.
Yeah, it seems travel is ripe for a rule overhaul or a mechanic rethink, and maybe it's been rethought and I just haven't found that system. But I was reading I think it's called The One Ring. It's the role-playing game version of Tolkien, and among other things, the way that they dealt with time and travel was the way that they set up the game is pretty neat, and it's kind of based around those types of interludes and downtime. Like you level at downtime. What struck me was that they had rethought the mechanic of leveling and when you level and how you spend your time, and it was very much custom made to be very Tolkien-y, and that was just a good idea. I think some sort of rethink of travel could be really cool. So is that what the interlude stuff is?
Kind of. It's things like you draw a card and a difficult obstacle that the group must negotiate is happens, and then it would be at the DM to it's just for the DM to have a jumping off point of something to have them encounter. The group finds something that helps them in some way, such as an oasis, minor treasure, ammo, food, friendly locals, etc. A hardship must be overcome, such as the death of an extra, spoiled or lost supplies, a mechanical breakdown, terrible weather, etc. So it's a very broad. It's just giving you broad ideas of some things that the player characters can face during a particular period of time.
That in contrast to the other Lord of the Rings role-playing game that happened in the 21st century. I'm looking at the CODA system travel rules for this, and there are 4 tables and a matrix, and then very long algebraic expressions that you have to work out for every single factor that could possibly be involved, not just from point A to point B, but the pace that you're walking, if you have wagons, what kinds of horses, what the species are of people, the weather, the terrain, like yada 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 yada. I mean, they've got a resolution of like, negative -0.1 for whatever the fuck. Like, hobbits are a little extra slow. They're at negative -0.1. Dwarves are a little faster at plus +0.2. God damn it. Really?
Nobody cares how fast we're moving, just that we're getting to the destination and how long it's going to take to get there.
I mean, am I crazy, or don't you just move as fast as the slowest thing in your group, right? I mean, isn't that common sense? I mean, I guess some people could move ahead, I guess, but anyway, it's like you can only move as fast as the wagons will go.
Yeah, the player characters need to travel at the speed of plot. That's a term from J. Michael Straczynski, who made Babylon 5, described that the spaceships, the fighters, when he was asked how this reinforcement group of fighters reached the critical battle in time, that was his answer. They move at the speed of plot.
So true. So true.
Speaking of sci-fi stuff, there is a really good example of some weird shit involving downtime during travel. Every game that I've played in a sci-fi universe that has faster than light travel, you're stuck for hours, days, or weeks on board this tiny little ship with nothing to do except what you make for yourself to do. Unless you happen to be in like hypersleep or something. What do you guys think about those situations? I've played a bunch of Trek, a bunch of Star Wars. Traveler's probably the worst of them, I think.
I think it just depends on the type of game, because some people, like sci-fi games I've played in, most of them are probably the away mission kind of game, where you're only on the ship to get to the next landing pad. But I've always thought a fun game would be on the ship, like when things happen on the ship itself. I'm always imagine you're on the Enterprise, right? And the Enterprise had a crew of what? Over 1,000? It's a floating city. Why not make a game where, maybe everybody's traveling to a destination, but more like an Alien style game where the setting is the ship for the most part, Something that revolves around what goes on the ship. Maybe it's intrigue on the ship. Maybe it's mutiny or something like that, or mundane stuff, but using the spaceship and the travel in space as the setting itself. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I just train the whole time. Every waking moment I train. I go through the holosims and beef up my computer skill. I exercise in order to increase my athletics. That's what I do. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That's how you win, dude. That's how you be like Worf. You go in there and practice your Federation Kung Fu on some random aliens, and then you play the little phaser game where you're shooting the dots that are zipping around. Get some bat'leth training.
Oh, yeah, don't forget the bat'leth training.
How else are you going to be a badass?
I mean, low key, why would you... I couldn't think of a better life.
God, me either.
I'm kind of mad. I think let's queue up this non-lethal bat'leth thing. Maybe make it slightly lethal so I can feel it. But I really just want to like decapitate some aliens. I'm having a bad day. Get drenched. Walk out of the holodeck drenched in blood. Someone walks in, you're just covered head to toe in blood. That would happen to me so much. I hate to admit it, but it's true. So I think we've arrived.
Yep, we've arrived at our destination, which is the end of the episode. Let's go ahead and go into geek things. I only have one this week. It is a documentary on YouTube called The Image Revolution. It is about the the rise and current status of Image Comics. For the most part, it's really good. I would say that for the first 15 minutes of the movie, they really suck hard on the dicks of Rob Liefeld and McFarlane for all the great things that they did for founding Image. But overall, it was a pretty good documentary. I really wish they would have gone more into some of the legal problems that particularly Todd McFarlane ran into with ownership of his characters, and whether or not, like particularly Neil Gaiman owned a particular character that he introduced in one issue of Spawn. I wish it would have gone more into some of the nitty gritty things, but for an overview of kind of the story of this indie or this third party publisher coming in and very much disrupting the status quo of DC and Marvel Comics, it was a pretty good story.
I've got one as well. It's a podcast, a fictional podcast. I don't usually get into the narrative podcasts, but I was recommended Star Trek Outpost, and it's very good. If you're a Trek fan and you're like me, I've watched all the episodes so many times, I just can't watch it anymore. So like I always I feel like I can't scratch that Star Trek itch anymore because I just can't be surprised. This is really good. So if you're just kind of looking for new podcasts, they have I think 80 episodes. It's been going on. I guess it's been made for several years now. It's really good. It's well voice acted. It's got all the appropriate sound effects. I don't know how they haven't got sued. But it's really good, and the story's really good. It's very much feels like listening to a brand new episode of Star Trek. It's got all new story. It's not set in any of the previously known settings. It takes place on Deep Space 3, a brand new imagining. So it's cool. Highly recommend.
I got a role-playing game that I just tried this morning. Guy Yohai Gall, he's self-published a indie role-playing game called Cairn, Cairn. It's a really rules-light medieval fantasy kind of thing, sort of dark fantasy, I'd say. It's pretty interesting. He, according to his page, it's based on these games called Knave and Into the Odd. I've never played either of those. But yeah, it's real simple game mechanics. Definitely like to the point, no nonsense, quick pickup kind of game. I enjoyed it quite a bit. He's getting ready to do a full release thing, like a print run and all that stuff. So I'll add a link to his itch page in the show notes. Check it out. Cairn. It is cool. The artwork's really fucking sweet. I like it a lot.
You say you gave it a try today?
Yeah, I tried it this morning. He just randomly ran one. The artwork reminds me of if you guys remember the old Diablo and like Warcraft 2 like manual art, like that pencil or ink like line drawing stuff, like real
big thick full lines.
Yeah, real edgy looking like fantasy art. Everything's kind of like gritty. I like it a lot. But it's based on this game's based a lot on like Welsh mythology and stuff like that. So everybody's playing humans. It's on the same kind of scale as old school D&D, like 3d6 on 3 attributes, and you roll a d20 and like roll under your attribute. There's no skills or anything. One thing that was weird about it is there is no attack roll or any kind of defense roll either, for that matter. You roll just what your weapon dice are, and it's always like 1, and that gets subtracted from hit points, and you've got this very small number of hit points that completely refreshes between combats. But then if it goes past that, you've got some armor that'll reduce that damage, but if it goes past that, you start digging into your strength, and that's the shit that's actual like bleeding wound, takes a long time to heal kind of stuff. But it felt a lot like Diablo in a lot of ways. There's like a slot-based inventory system that is very reminiscent of that. The spells are like real simple, like one sentence descriptions, and it intentionally stays away from, quantifying very much. It was a good time.
I'll definitely check that out. Well, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Literally, yeah, for sure.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.